morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to the latest Meaningful Business member workshop. We have a really interesting topic today, which, as usual, has been sourced from our conversations with you all. And we understand it's a really complex and important topic and challenge that people are grappling with this year. And we're delighted to be joined by Zak Kaufman, the co-founder and CEO of Vera Solutions. Zak is a fellow member and an MB100 alumni. We had the pleasure of seeing some of the content late last week, and it's very good. Vera have been working with organizations across the social sector for 15 years, and I'll let him tell you more about that, but it should be a very good session. As always, feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we'll try to come to as many of those as possible. We are recording today's session, and we'll be following up afterwards with some resources and other opportunities. But I think without any further ado, I will hand over to you, Zak, to get cracking.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tom. I'm really excited to be with everybody today and to talk about technology for impact measurement. So this session is really going to be a bit of a course, you could say, around impact measurement 101, to help us all get our brains wrapped around what good impact data looks like in our different organizations. I'll get us into that in a minute, but we want to, yeah, there we go. Oh, somebody's from like Iceland or something. Well, I want to see where everybody's coming in from. So you can just put your dot on the screen here and show where you are joining us from today. I know we got a really global group with the MB community. So I'll get my dot on the map as well, best I can. If you're on a phone, this is not the easiest exercise. Quite a few from Europe. We got some folks from around Africa. We got some folks coming in from India, from the US. Excellent. I'll leave this open for just another minute. My name is Zak. As Tom said, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Vera Solutions. We are a social enterprise working all around the globe to amplify the impact of the social sector using technology. We really grew out of a nonprofit, and I'll share that story in a couple minutes, and the work that I was doing in impact measurement 15 years ago, 16 years ago, that spawned the journey that we're on today to change the world and change the way that the sector manages impact data. So yeah, really excited to be with you all, and really wonderful to be part of the MB community. It's been really great for us since joining the original cohort of the MB 100 over the last 4 years. It's been an awesome ecosystem to be a part of. So big shout out to Tom and the team there. Great. So we got a good virtual audience joining us today from around the globe, which is great to see. We're going to open up with a little bit of a brainstorm. So let's see where you guys are coming from, and actually, yeah, tell us your organization's name while you're at it. So if you can pop your organization in here, so we can see who all is joining us today. And then the question that I want you to think about, the question I want you to think about while we're gearing up for the next one is who cares about your organization's impact data? So I'll be asking that on the next Menti slide. Who cares about your organization's impact data? Which kind of stakeholders care about your organization's impact data? As a way to get us warming up. Great to see so many different impact businesses joining us from around the globe. I think what was great to see in the survey data you guys completed ahead of time is we got a lot of diversity in this group, both geographically as well as the kind of businesses that we're running, as well as the kind of outcomes that we're working towards and the kind of change that we're working to produce. So that's amazing. That means that that speaks to the power of the MB ecosystem. It also makes my job a little bit challenging because we have to make sure that we're bringing content today that's really relevant across all these different sectors and all the different SDGs. So we'll dive into that in a second. So now let's brainstorm who cares about our impact data. So who are some different stakeholders that care about your organization's impact data? Who's impact data important to? Why is impact data important? See some chats coming through as well. And greetings to everybody's AIs that are joining us today as well. Great. Investors, clients, top management, impact investors, employees, governments, customers, funders, clients, the public, users, awesome partners, internal decision makers, my own team. Yeah, this is great. So we've got a big diversity. I see funders and investors like really big up front, but then I also see a kind of a concentration here around employees, our team, customers, beneficiaries, or participants in our programs. So this is great. There's a wide range of stakeholders that care about our impact data. So let me pop over to our slides for a second, right? So some of the different groups that we look at that are kind of focused around on impact data. Funders and investors, as you guys talked about, prospective funders and investors, right? It's really important that we're on top of our impact data, as we're going out for investment and kind of telling the story of our company. Um, our board and advisors, right? Our staff and our prospective hires. It's super important, right? Like I interviewed somebody last week, and she's really interested in joining our company in particular because of the impact that we're having, right? And so being on top of our impact data, the clients that we're serving, the stories that we're seeing and experiencing, that's really important as you're hiring as well, right? And as you're managing your team and trying to motivate your team, right? Joining partners, the networks we're a part of, right? Tom will tell you MB absolutely cares about everybody's impact data, right? It helps meaningful business kind of tell the story of this network and the power of this network. And then you guys mentioned customers and participants as well, right? It's really important to think about impact data through that lens, because it can really help us to attract new customers, right? If we can show that the journey that our customers are on, that can be part of our value proposition. It can be part of our sales pitch, in fact. But as well, it's really important to have feedback loops, feedback going in all directions, both from participants and customers to the company, as well as from the company to customers, so that the customers, the participants can see what's coming from the kind of data that we might be collecting from them, and that's the responsible thing to do. Awesome. So the world cares more about our impact than ever before. That's without a doubt. And done well, impact measurement really helps us to do a couple things. One is it enables us to answer questions and generate evidence. That's really what it comes down to, right? So I think the term impact can be a bit loaded and a bit confusing. And what I'm hoping in this session we can do is demystify impact measurement a bit to make it a little bit simpler, a little bit more accessible. And doing that starts with understanding that impact measurement is really, really just about answering questions and generating evidence. So you don't need master's degrees or PhDs to be able to answer questions and generate evidence. You need to be able to know what kind of questions are important to ask and answer, and you need to be able to think through some key aspects of evidence, the kind of evidence that we want to generate, and then what the audience is looking for. The audience, those stakeholders that we're talking to, what do they need to see from us when it comes to that evidence? We'll unpack that a little bit more. But what does this help us do? It helps us do two things. One is it helps us prove that we've done what we said we were going to do, or that we've done what we say we've done, right? To back that up with our numbers and with our stories. And then it helps us improve so that we can actually increase our impact, so we can get more done and achieve better outcomes for our communities and for the world. So that's really the why of impact measurement, is to help us prove and to help us improve. So here's the approach that we're going to take today, and certainly feel free to ask questions in the chat as we're going along. I'm going to walk through. We're gonna pivot into looking at my journey, and I'll share a little bit about how Vera came to be and the origin of how we came to be doing this kind of work. We'll dive into 4 key types of impact data, and then we'll look at them through the lens of a couple examples of other social enterprises that are really leading in not just balancing impact measurement with their business success or their growth, but actually driving their growth with good impact measurement. We'll then take a look at operationalizing that, right? So we'll take a look at the data cycle. How do we get data from the questions that we have all the way to the answers and the visualizations that we need? And then we'll also take a look at another framework, which is the 4 pillars of good impact data. So what do we need to do right within our organization? What do we need to do well within our organizations to be able to sustainably and consistently have good impact data flowing within our organizations? And then we'll share a bit of an offer at the end if you're interested in taking this forward. If you're interested in working with the Vera team as well, to help strengthen your impact measurement or your technology work, that's something we're always eager to work with great mission-driven organizations like we are, and if we can be helpful, that's why we exist as a social enterprise. All right, so that's the approach that we're on today, and certainly, as I said, feel free to drop some questions in the chat. So this is my journey, or sort of from Excel to excelling, if you will. And it really started with a jump drive, like the one on the right. So I moved over to South Africa in 2008. Um, I was working for a nonprofit, and I had been sort of appointed the MEL in charge of MEL, monitoring, evaluation, and learning, basically the impact measurement guy. And this happened in the context of us growing really, really fast. I was pretty young. I was 22 at the time, and I was pretty good with data, pretty good with numbers. I had been, studying public health and brought that skill set to the organization. Um, but the organization was in an interesting spot. It was really asking a lot of all the right questions. We were founded by a medical doctor working on adolescent health, gathering really good data, but all that data was being gathered on stacks of paper, and being consolidated into Excel spreadsheets like this one. And so this was 2008. Excuse me. Sorry for the cough. We'll probably get a little bit more of that today. But we had these stacks of paper that were kept in file cabinets while we were running these programs across Southern Africa, and they were brought out of the file cabinets and digitized into spreadsheets like this every 3 months, right? So there was this lag of data just sitting in paper for 3 months, and then getting into this spreadsheet structure at the end of every 3 months, and then getting emailed into the head office. So ultimately, this meant a jump drive that had all of everybody's spreadsheets on it, and one person that oversaw that. So if we kind of design that out, or kind of map that flow out, it looked like this. Each of the program sites had its file cabinets and stacks of paper. Those then got consolidated into these spreadsheets that got emailed into the head office once a quarter. And then the head office, we had one person kind of compiling this into a monster spreadsheet. And then that person was the only person who could answer questions about the organization's performance, about the number of kids graduating from our programs, about the change that we're affecting in the communities we're working in, the knowledge and attitude improvements around HIV that we were seeing in the HIV programs, or the testing numbers. You had one kind of point of failure, and it all revolved around these spreadsheets. So, and if this looks at all familiar, we've since seen that, many, many, many organizations, thousands of organizations, rely on a system that looks a little bit like this kind of manual consolidation of data in spreadsheets. And then this other process here at the top is really tedious, this manual reporting to many different funders. And this is a sort of a problem statement that the Vera team is now starting to tackle, and how we can drive easier impact reporting and impact data sharing for the sector, which is certainly something I'd be keen to talk more about with you guys at another time. I don't know that we'll have much time to talk about it today, but this is kind of the reality that I inherited in 2008. And there's a lot of problems here, right? So one problem is there's no feedback loops. You don't have any feedback loops. You don't have buy-in for the staff that are putting all that time and energy into the data collection and the data management. The feedback from staff in the field that were working really hard to get this data collected, the attendance registers that we had every day, the questionnaires that we were collecting beginning and end of each program, the feedback from them was that it feels like we're being policed. We never see what comes from the data that's getting captured. The second big problem is that mistakes are made at every level, right? Like every time human beings are consolidating data or compiling data like this manually, data quality is going to take a hit because humans make mistakes. We just do. That's just a reality. The third thing was that we actually weren't capturing any individual level data. So, as you saw that spreadsheet, it was really just counting the number of boys, counting the number of girls going through that program. And then taking kind of the average, change that we saw on the questionnaire data. So when you don't digitize individual level data, and you only structure the aggregate data, then you're really limited in the questions that you can answer from that data, right? You're going to be limited by the way that you've structured your spreadsheet at the end of the day. And that's what we found, right? We were able to answer the questions we had set the spreadsheet up to answer, but we weren't able to answer other questions or report in other ways as the needs of the organization evolved. And then the other kicker was that we needed to scale the program 10x, right? And we needed to scale the program from 5,000 kids a year to 50,000 kids a year just in South Africa. Not to mention the growth we were seeing in Zimbabwe, Zambia, and other countries. So this is kind of the system that we had in place. And you can maybe give me a nod if this resonates with you, or looks familiar, looks familiar in any way, or give a reaction or a thumbs up. So I had some ideas, and I kind of asked, can we change this? Does it have to be this way? It seems like we're asking the right questions, we're collecting the right data, but we're really struggling with the system side of this to make the most of the data and get data into the hands of the people that need it. And so I had this wacky idea at the time to bring it onto Salesforce, to kind of burn down the spreadsheets and bring our impact data onto Salesforce. And this was a pretty wacky use of Salesforce at the time. Salesforce it was probably being used by a few thousand nonprofits at that point, but it was mostly being used for CRM and fundraising, tracking donor data, tracking donation data. So the concept of tracking your program data or your participant beneficiary data, your outcome data on Salesforce was really quite novel back in 2008 to 2009. But we built out this system called the scoreboard. We had dashboards like this one that were kicking out to staff all around the organization, and it really changed the nature of how we were running our programs, how we were working as an organization, because you went from an organization where there were no feedback loops and people could not see what was coming from all the data that we were collecting to an organization where data was in our lifeblood, right? We had data in front of everybody, whether you're the CEO and you've got a tablet and you're going into a donor meeting and you can pull up a dashboard like this and the donor asks you, well, you're using soccer for these programs. What about girls? You can pull up a dashboard and say, actually, this is data as of yesterday, and you can see about 48% of the participants are female. Um, whether you're the CEO or whether you're a volunteer running the program in the field, at one of the program sites, and you've got the dashboard at the end of the week, the updated dashboard printed off and posted on the wall, so you can kind of see how have you moved the needle on our targets, towards our targets for this, for this big program that we're running in South Africa. How's your site doing against, how's Cape Town as a site doing against Port Elizabeth or Kimberley or the other sites where we're running the program? So this was really powerful in changing the attitude around data, and I think empowering staff around the organization with respect to the data we had. And if you notice, we weren't just counting and tracking the participants. We were able to get a good look at the age breakdown, the sex breakdown, how many kids are coming through the program right now, how many have graduated the program, but also get a sense of the outcome data. So how much have we made a difference in the knowledge, attitudes, communication, testing behavior, and so on related to what we were working on, which was HIV prevention. So that was kind of how this all started. And then a funny thing happened, which was other organizations started coming to us and saying, hey, we don't work in HIV prevention, but this is exactly what we need. How do we do this? And that's how Vera Solutions got started back in 2010. So we grew out of this nonprofit that I used to work for, and we realized, hey, this problem is much bigger than adolescent targeted HIV prevention. It really transcends all of the sustainable development goals. It transcends transcends the sector as a whole and the globe. And these are the same kinds of challenges that lots of organizations are facing. So we started Vera with the mission of amplifying the impact of the social sector using technology. We've been at that now for 15 years. We're working both with nonprofits, social enterprises, grant makers, and impact investors. We really focus on solutions for program management, program delivery, impact measurement. And we've grown to a team of 140 staff across the globe. So we've got folks in India, we've got folks in South Africa and Brazil, the US, UK, and a few others like me scattered around in different places. We don't just work on Salesforce. We still see Salesforce as a really great technology backbone, but we also work with other technologies as well. And happy to speak. I'll speak to that a little bit at the end.
Mm.
So that's Vera and a bit about our journey and where we've come from.
Just get at the moment.
Sorry. Yeah, if you guys can just stay on mute or hop off mute if you want to ask a question is also cool. So what we've seen over the years is that the most successful social enterprises aren't just balancing growth with impact. They're actually using impact measurement. They're using right-sized impact measurement and their impact data to drive their growth, to propel them forward, whether that's raising around, whether that's attracting new customers, or creating great partnerships. Strong impact data helps them make the case for their business and for their enterprise to drive growth. So what I want to do now is actually focus on some great examples of organizations that are doing just that and try to paint this picture. But before we do that, we need to talk about what do we mean when we talk about impact data? Like what are the types of impact data that we need to be thinking about as an organization? And I would say there's four key types of impact data. They're both quantitative and qualitative. So you don't want to just have one type of impact data. So there's four key types of impact data that we as social enterprises and impact businesses need to be thinking about when we're trying to tell a holistic story and give a holistic picture of the impact that we're producing. Okay. So the first is reach, right? And reach is often seen as kind of the most basic kind of impact data. So reach might be, in the case we were talking about just now, the number of graduates, but being able to maybe break that down by sex, by age, maybe some other ways we could slice and dice that data. Or maybe it's looking at the number of latrines built, or the number of acres of land that you're protected, the number of trees planted, the number of farmers, served, or, so on, right? But it's really getting a sense of the scale of your program, your intervention, the delivery, what is the reach, what is the extent of the community and the people that you're serving. That naturally should be growing, in most cases is going to be growing over time. The second is depth. So depth is all about answering the question of how much are we moving the needle per person or per community or per household or per acre of land, right? Like how much change are we producing per unit of our reach, if that makes sense, right? So you can almost in some way think about impact in this way as like your reach times your depth, or if you charted them out on a chart, reach and depth charted together, impact would almost be like the area under that curve, right? An organization with a lot of reach and a lot of depth. In other words, they're reaching, thousands and thousands of individuals, and they're making a huge difference on average for each individual. That's an organization that's having a tremendous amount of impact. So depth might look like the percentage increase in savings over 12 months or reduction in dropout rates. It could look at improvement in literacy or numeracy. It depends obviously on the kind of the programs that you're running, what your depth indicators are going to be, what your outcome indicators are going to be. So other more traditional M&E folks will think of these as reach. You'll sometimes hear the term outputs. Depth, you'll sometimes hear the term outcomes. I may use those a little bit interchangeably as well. But yeah, that's what we want to be looking at with these two. Outputs, our outputs or our reach, and our outcomes or our depth. The third piece is often neglected, and this is feedback. So you might say, feedback, is that really impact data? And it is impact data. It's really important. It just helps us, if we think back to what is impact measurement about, right? It's about proving and improving, and it's about asking questions and generating evidence. Feedback data is absolutely really important impact data, right? Because it enables us to ask questions and answer questions that actually we're probably not going to answer just from our reach and our depth data. So this might look at, customer satisfaction data. It might look at customer reviews. You can take a more qualitative approach to feedback and run focus groups with your customers. This is especially really helpful if you're kind of trying out a new product or a new service, or you want to kind of pilot a new approach or a new program. Getting some really good qualitative data to not just answer the questions of how much, which we're going to be able to answer through the reach and depth data, but answering the questions of why and how. You really need to take a qualitative approach to that. So that's going to be through interviews, through focus groups, that kind of qualitative methodology to get at feedback. And then the last type of impact data, anybody want to guess what the last type of impact data might be? If you want to put it in the chat. Any guesses? What's the last type of impact data? What are we missing from this picture? Outcomes. Outcomes are covered by depth. Good guess. What are we missing? We got reach, we got depth, we got feedback. If you were an investor and you want to see a really clear picture of of this organization's impact, what do you want to see? ROI is an interesting guess. So ROI, return on investment. So that would be that. Typically ROI you're going to be looking at through a lens of you're going to be looking at ROI kind of through a lens of like how much has been spent and then what's been achieved in the context of how much has been spent. So I would say that's a further level of analysis you can do once you already have this impact data. All right, Pratik and Tua, I'm going to give you guys a joint victory lap there. So stories and pictures, right? So this again enables us to tell a picture or paint a picture that we can't paint if we're just focused on the charts and the numbers. Stories are a really powerful type of impact data as well, right? Let me tell you about this one participant. So when you take that together with, hey, look at the change we're making across the million individuals that are participating in our program or that have used our product, but then you can zoom in and say, like, let me tell you about this lady, right? Or let me tell you about this person. That becomes really, really powerful because whoever is in that audience can really connect emotionally, and they can connect to they can kind of see what's behind those numbers that doesn't come across in the numbers alone. So the last thing to say about these is that none of these alone is sufficient, right? So you might have great stories, right? But you might maybe are struggling a bit on depth. Maybe you got really good reach data, but you're not doing enough on feedback. Every organization could be doing a little bit more or a little bit better when it comes to these kinds of data. And we'll do a little bit of a poll to see how we're doing in just a second on these. But none of these alone is sufficient. They're kind of like the analogy I like to use is that they're like the components of a nutritious meal, or hopefully a pretty delicious one. So my wife and I are vegetarian, so we'll take this in a vegetarian context and go with my belabored food analogy for just a minute here. So your reach is like your starch. We're trying to make a big tasty stir fry here. So your reach is like your starch, right? It's like that base, like that. You kind of, if you want to make the meal last, like you're gonna have to have that the rice or pasta, noodles, whatever it is, right? That's going to kind of give you the base calories. And reach data is like that, right? It's like the price of paying, right? The price of playing. Like it's just basic and that needs to be there. Depth. So depth is kind of like the protein, the tofu in this example, or if you're a meat eater, then it's like your meat. Depth is what's gonna really give you some strength to this meal, right? It's gonna give some substance to the meal and make it a really a more powerful, nutritious meal, right? You take a meal without any protein, there's not a lot of nutrition, there's not a lot of substance. A program that doesn't have any depth data doesn't have a lot of substance to the evidence that it's coming out with. Then you got feedback, which are kind of like your veggies, right? They're going to add a little bit of color. They're going to add a little bit of different flavor, a little bit of different texture to this impact stir fry that we're whipping up. And then stories are like the sauce, right? They bring it all together and they give that flavor that makes us remember this dish and really enjoy it at the end of the day. So if you think about a stir fry like this, or whatever your kind of preferred type of meal is. You could adjust the metaphor as you wish. But if you take any of these pieces out, we're kind of missing something, aren't we? Right? We're kind of missing. If you take the depth out, we're missing that substance. If you take the veggies out, we're missing that crunch. We're missing that color and that nutrition that's good for us, right? If you take the sauce out, like who wants to eat that? Who wants to eat that stir fry? It's not very yummy, right? So that's kind of my analogy here. So let's pop over to Menti. Let's pop back over to Menti quick, and we'll do a little poll of the group to see how we're doing with our different types of impact data. So remember, we covered this with the who cares about our impact data. We talked about all these different stakeholders. So now let's look at this. I want you all to rate your organization's current impact data. So what you have right now, how good is your reach data, your depth data, your feedback data, and your stories? 1 to 10. So 1 is we're really weak. We are doing almost nothing here. Like we really are not there yet. 10 is we're leading the sector. We're amazing. Like there's nothing we could be doing better. Like we're a 10 out of 10 on this. Let's see how we're doing. This is great. Be good to get a sense of the group as a whole. And what I like here is we can also see where there's a little bit of a distribution and some difference within the group. So it looks like it looks like on average we're doing pretty well with our reach data. Not as well with feedback. Depth and stories look like they're a little bit tied. Certainly some room to work here. I'll give you guys 5 more seconds to get our data in here. Okay, great. So that gives us a sense of kind of where is this group, and so let's take stock of this. I think it's helpful to see. Okay, on average, we're doing best as a group. We're doing best when it comes to reach, to answering questions around reach. And we're doing weakest around feedback, right? So let's really think about that and absorb that and think about, what can we be doing differently, with respect to feedback and making sure we're getting good feedback data. So one way that I think we can help to unpack that is looking at examples of other organizations and what they're doing. So I'll leave the Menti open if you want to keep answering if you haven't gotten to it. But let's look at some examples of leading social enterprises. These are a mix of nonprofit, for-profit, and I don't think I think that check mark is somehow over from Menti still showing up on my screen. I don't know if it's visible to you guys, but it's all good. So we're going to look at what well-rounded impact data looks like across these 4 types of data. Okay. So first we'll take a look at World Bicycle Relief. So this is an awesome organization. They're working across a mix of different programs and outcome areas. They've got health programs, they've got education programs, they've got workforce development programs, and they're distributing bicycles to people who can benefit from those bicycles, whether that's girls going to school, entrepreneurs starting businesses, or health workers going to treat patients, right? So they're absolutely on top of the reach data. I pulled this screenshot a little while ago, but they're tracking the number of lives they've changed. They've tracked the number of bicycles distributed in 2020, about 45,000 bicycles that year, the number of mechanics that they train. So one of the things with reach is it doesn't have to be one indicator, right? You may have a number of different outputs because they're producing a different kind of impact with the bicycle distribution and the mechanic trainings, right? So there can be different output indicators that you can track there. And they're not stopping there. They're really able to easily break this down and map it out across the world so they can show here's where we're working and here's here's a chart that shows the reach across different countries. You can also look at a reach over time and we can see which programs. I know this is quite small, but we can see, they've distributed almost 600,000 bicycles at this point, and we can see over time, how that breakdown, what's that breakdown been across these different programs. What about depth? So for depth, they actually partnered with some independent researchers to evaluate their educational program back in, I think this is in 2020. Or 2021, and so to do a good job of depth. Oftentimes, you're not gonna try to do it for your whole customer base or your whole program. You want to zoom in on a sample. You want to zoom in on part of it. So what they did is they zoomed in on Zambia, on a program in rural Zambia, and they did a really rigorous evaluation for their program focused on girls' education. So they're distributing bicycles to girls in rural Zambia, and what they found was they compared girls that got these bicycles to ones that hadn't, and they found a 28% reduction in absenteeism at school, right? So they're starting to look at some of the educational outcomes. So they're able to reduce absenteeism, so days missed, by almost 30%. They reduced the average commute by over an hour. They reduced commute time by 33% for the girls that had these bicycles. They improved punctuality by 66%, and so on and so on. So really, really powerful data from a sample of about 2,500 girls that participated in their programs across 100 different primary schools. So this is a gold standard study. This is a randomized controlled trial. That's a way of producing really high quality evidence. It's not the only way to do it. They didn't stop there. That was 2019. They didn't stop there. They did a further evaluation in Zimbabwe, right? And so this one, they took on a different program, and they're looking at different outcomes in terms of household income and income diversity, right? And again, seeing really strong evidence on that program. So getting a sense of your depth is not a one and done thing, and same with reach, right? It's really data that we're going to keep asking these questions over time to make sure that we're seeing the change that we want to see. With feedback, they use a mobile app called TerraWorks to collect feedback from all of their field mechanics about their day-to-day experience and their perceptions on their training, their opportunities, and their income. That's just one of the things they're doing with feedback, but a good example of how they're using technology to bring in that kind of impact data. You can simply do this with Google Forms if you want to, or Qualtrics or other kinds of web form tools, right? You can get customer feedback that way. And you might find there's a lot of value in getting private customer feedback, not just the customer feedback that comes in on Google Maps or app stores or whatnot. That's valuable too, but also getting feedback privately and really seeking it out intentionally. You might find that you learn some things from that you don't learn otherwise. And then stories, I think WBR has done an awesome job of this. This is an example of a story on their website about when they distributed their 500th bicycle in Kisumu. And again, I think they're a nice leader. So this is kind of a balanced picture of impact data. I'll share one other example across the pond over in the U.S. And I'll let Abby tell the story of the organization first to introduce you to Isuzu.
Ownership has been the biggest driver of wealth in the United States. But there's a systematic inequality that prevents marginalized folks from getting access to loans. Today, we have an opportunity to right that wrong. We started Isuzu with a simple premise. Your financial identity shouldn't determine where you end up in life.
We work with large multifamily owners and operators to capture rental payment data and report it into the credit bureaus to help tenants build and establish their credit scores. There's currently 45 million Americans that don't have a credit score today. We can unlock over $3 trillion in mortgages.
That in and of itself is not only good for the American economy, it's good for advancing and paving a permanent bridge to financial access and inclusion for everyone.
Cool. So this is a video from a couple years ago, right? And it starts to they're telling a story here. They're telling the story of Isuzu and the potential, right? That $3 trillion opportunity that they're working on. And as Wamimo Abbey, one of the and Samir Goel are the two co-CEOs, both good friends of mine. Wamimo, interestingly, was part. Both of them were part of the Global Good Fund Fellowship, which I was a part of a while ago. And each year for about 5 years, I went back and ran a similar session to this with Global Good Fund Fellows. So Wamimo was in a similar session to this in 2019. So I thought actually they'd be an interesting case study to kind of look at their impact measurement journey going forward from their very early days in 2019. So by 2021, they had really piloted their program, their offering successfully, right? So they were starting to reach renters around the country, and they had about 3,500 renters that they had helped to establish prime credit scores that didn't previously have credit, which is pretty powerful when you consider the impact of that for the life-changing effect of having a prime credit score versus having no credit score and what that unlocks for you. They also found, on average, depth. We're improving the credit score by 51% on average across all of the individuals that they're reporting rental data to the credit bureaus for, right? So that was what they had in 2021. So they used that data to go fundraise and grow. Sorry, they also were starting to collect stories, right? So one of the things they started doing during COVID was having a rental assistance program for people who were stuck and were going to kind of miss a month of rental payment to help people kind of close the gap while they were kind of getting onto their feet. And that was they've got some powerful stories like from Jennifer here to help tell that story. Now, from 2022, they partnered with Kairos Impact Foundation to evaluate their program further, and they saw this distribution, and we could spend more time analyzing this, but the nutshell of this is the red bar shows the people. This is over 6 months from November 2021 to June 2022, and you can see the proportion of people with poor credit scores of the residents with poor credit scores goes down from 42% to 27%. The proportion with good or better credit scores goes from about 36% to about 49% here, right? 48% rather. So dramatic improvement over just 6 months, right? Which is pretty powerful, right? Not all of us are working on the kind of impact that you can see such a dramatic change in 6 months, but Isuzu really is. So what do? They use that data to help them go fundraise and really grow their program. They partnered with Freddie Mac, and that allowed them to really scale their program in 2023. So now they've got 240,000 units across almost 1,500 properties just with Freddie Mac alone. That then results in 27,000 individuals establishing a credit score who didn't have a credit score. 64% of them seeing a credit score improvement, 46 point average credit score improvement. So they haven't seen too much of a decline as they're getting to scale with quality, right? They're not seeing too much of a decline in their depth as they're getting more and more reach. And then moving into 2024, and this is coming from their impact report for last year, they've now helped over 200,000 renters establish their first-time credit scores with Isuzu. They've unlocked $50 billion of credit activity. That's other loans for individuals, so getting car loans or home loans. And 12% of their renters have improved from subprime credit scores to prime credit scores. And again, we kind of talked a little bit about what that we could spend more time talking about Isuzu, but this is a good example of a really of an evolution over time to get better and better depth data and reach data, plus feedback data around their app. Obviously, a mix of feedback with any app that's out on the app store, but some great data out on Google Play. For Isuzu, for example, that they're getting that feedback. They're also getting feedback in lots of other ways, kind of within the app and within the program that they run. So that's kind of Isuzu as another example. If we had more time, we'd talk about 1 Acre Fund, overall story, right? 5 million farmers, saving farmers an average of, helping them generate $100 more profit, being able to break that data down by country, but then also zooming in on individual stories like this, like this avocado farmer in Rwanda. So hopefully that gives you a sense of kind of what balanced impact measurement can look like, or balanced impact data can look like when we're doing it well, right? So we did our self-evaluation. To get a sense of our impact data. We can see if that data changed at all. Looks like it's still about where we were before. So feedback data being the area that the group needs to work on. So we can talk a little bit about ways we can do that. So you might be asking, okay, well, this is great. I can see the different kinds of impact data. I can see some examples of leading social enterprises, but where do we start if we're at square one? If we're one of these organizations where our impact data is like a 2 or a 3, across the board. Clearly that, some of us are some of us are, struggling here and have, on average, we're below 5, right? So across many of these areas. So we've got some work to do, right? So where do we start if we're at square one? And the first thing to understand is the data cycle. So this may be a little bit rudimentary, but I think it's worth walking through for a minute so that we kind of level set before we talk about what I call the 4 pillars of good impact data. So this is the data cycle. So the data cycle starts by planning. Planning is really all around figuring out what questions do we want to answer, right? What questions do we want to answer? What evidence are we looking to generate from our impact data? So that's our plan. And we'll unpack in a minute kind of what that plan, what the strategy for impact measurement looks like. Once you have a plan, you got to go collect and capture the data. So that might be using mobile data collection tool like this. If you're collecting that data face to face, it might be something you're doing over the web. It might be something you're doing over the phone. It might be something that you're doing with pen and paper. That's also fine. But the point is you got to go collect and capture the data if you want to be able to answer questions, some of these reach depth feedback questions. The next is to manage the data that you've collected and captured. So this is a screenshot of Vera's data management system, which is on Salesforce. We manage our whole company on Salesforce, whether that's our our pipeline for potential projects that we're going to run, or the projects we're running now, or the people that are assigned to projects, or the hours that are getting worked each day by each person, or the customer feedback data that we're getting, right? Or the customer reach data that we're tracking, or the depth data that we're getting from the surveys that we run. That's all coming into our data management system on Salesforce. Then we want to analyze that data. So again, you can dashboard or visualize that data. It could be done with Salesforce. In this case, could be done with Power BI, Google Looker Studio, Tableau. There's lots of different tools you can use for analysis and visualization. And from there, we need to ultimately use the data, the analysis and the insights that we get from that, and then revisit the plan. What new questions have emerged that we need to answer? So this is the data cycle, right? An organization that is quite mature in impact measurement is running this data cycle. And they're not just running it to answer one type of question, right? They're really running this across the different types of impact data. So this applies whether we're talking about reach data or depth data or feedback data. Everything comes through this data cycle. And actually, if you're doing a really good job of stories, you might even do stories through a data cycle like this as well. So how do we operationalize that cycle? How do we get reliable and actionable impact data? And this is where it's going to get a little bit more practical. And then I'll ask you guys. I'm going to introduce the 4 pillars of good impact data. And again, we'll get back to Menti to self-evaluate and see how we're all doing on these 4 pillars. So here are the 4 pillars. So it starts with a strong strategy with suitable methods or appropriate methods that we're using when it comes to data collection, strong data systems, and then sufficient capacity, right? Sufficient person capacity for managing all this. So I'm going to double click into each of these to show you what I mean with respect to each of these pillars. So the 4 pillars for good impact data. And just like the 4 types of impact data, if you're just, if you're just doing well on 2 or 3 of these, but it's really struggling with one of them, it's gonna really cut you down. It's gonna hurt your organization. You really need to work on strength across all of these 4. So let's look at strategy first. So strategy is going to start with a coherent theory of change or a logic model. Logic model is really a type of theory of change that's structured in this nice organized way from inputs all the way to impact. So we can map our inputs to what are the things we need to run our program or intervention or deliver our product or service, the activities that we're doing, the outputs that are kind of the immediate results of what we do, often kind of the reach data, the outcomes. So what's true as a result of that. So what do the outputs kind of lead to in terms of the change for the individual? So again, that's your depth data. And then the impact, which is really the big kind of goal, the overarching goals that we're working to achieve, which may be something we're able to measure, or maybe something that's more system wide, right? Or it could be much bigger than our organization. It could just be kind of the impact that we're contributing to with regard to the Sustainable Development Goals or other kind of countrywide goals. Once this has been mapped out, this logic model, and I'll give you a template for it in a second, then we need to clearly define our indicators. And we need to really clearly define our indicators and how we're going to track the data for those indicators. So we need to build a data collection plan and have a detailed plan that lays out how do we collect, manage, and analyze the data for those. It's going to look more or less like this, and we'll give you guys a template that you can take away and feel free to use as well. But you're going to answer questions like, what's the indicator? How are we collecting the data? Where does it come from? When is it going to be collected? What's the frequency? Who's collecting it? And then how are we going to analyze that data? You should be able to answer those questions for every single indicator that you want to track. So that's what a good strategy looks like. So here's a little logic model worksheet that you can take away. Again, we'll give you a little packet after this. We'll send you a PDF that gives you some of these materials you can use, where you're mapping out those inputs all the way to the goals or the impact that you're producing. And oftentimes it can help to break out your outcomes by short term and medium term. So short term, like we can actually see these pretty quickly after we deliver what we're delivering, and medium term being something that we're going to track longer term. So if we think about a SUSU, right, they're tracking change in credit score, they might be able to see that in 6 months already, but medium term they might actually be trying to change the financial situation, financial well-being of a family, or other kinds of medium-term outcomes. Data collection plan, again, I've kind of talked through those different questions that you want to answer, but this is just sort of a bigger template that you can use in laying out one row at a time. What's the indicator? How are we collecting data? Who and where is it coming from? When are we collecting it? And who's responsible? And how are we going to analyze it as well? Okay. So let's move on to methods. And methods, we could spend a lot of time talking about methods. So I'm happy to field other questions around this if you guys want to dig into this. I know we've got a little bit of time after I'm done presenting. But we'll first talk about methods at a fairly high level. So the key with methods is that we need to have standardized data collection instruments, okay? Which may sound simple, but basically we shouldn't be like adding new questions and changing questions all the time. Even if you're just using a Google form, like you want to sort of really think through what are the pieces of data that we're going to need to collect, and then stick with that form for a while, because as you change it, you lose the ability to be able to compare to the data that came in previously, or you lose the ability to kind of see the change that somebody experienced from point A to point B to point C, right? So you want to have standardized, consistent data collection instruments. You want to consistently collect data. Again, that's a big theme here with methodology, is around consistency. So you shouldn't be collecting data one way for, in this one site or this one place or this one, this one program that you're running, and in a totally different way, for another, if you're trying to answer the same question. So if you're trying to answer the same question, we should be collecting the data in a consistent way. And the methodology could be anything from an attendance sheet, where we're just trying to track that reach data, through to, a pretty advanced survey that could be done on a mobile device, or could be done over the phone or over the browser or whatnot. You want an appropriate level of rigor in your design. So you're going to really want to think through, do we need a control group or a comparison group? Do we need a level of evidence that's really going to stand up at the end of the day, like we talked about with World Bicycle Relief and One Acre Fund, by the way, another great example where they've done randomized controlled trials to really have rigorous evidence to show the impact of their program for farmers and on their savings. You want to minimize bias and confounding, which is the topic of a whole other discussion, but we'll park that for now. And then you want to design for robust data quality. So you want to be thinking about you want to be thinking about how do we maximize data accuracy, timeliness, consistency, and then the other dimensions. There's about 8 different dimensions of data quality that you want to be thinking about to make sure that your data is really going to be, again, strong and consistent across the board. Some of the ways that we collect data, again, there's going to be a mix of quantitative and qualitative methods. Which methods you use depend on which questions you're trying to answer. So quantitatively, you might be doing surveys or questionnaires. You could, the way that you're administering those could be any number of different ways, as I've alluded to, whether that's kind of face-to-face or just over the web. You might want to sample your individuals. So rather than collecting data from absolutely everybody, you might want to take a sample of just 1,000 people or just 500 people to get a more manageable amount of data, especially if data collection is going to be quite costly for you. You can also there's a lot of great technology that can help with point of service tracking. So tracking whether that's attendance or whether that's tracking intake or whether that's tracking distribution of product. You want to get that data collected really as close to the point of service as possible, so that we can get real-time tracking of what's going on. And I know some awesome MB companies have great apps that they're running. So you guys probably are already really on top of that, that reach data and that real-time data. That's really powerful. So for you guys, maybe that's already in place, and it's really a question of how do we do more surveying or questionnaires? How do we answer some other questions, or how do we get better stories, right? For every organization, there's going to be a chink in the armor and something to work on with respect to impact measurement and impact data. On the qualitative side, these are kind of the most common methodologies used. So focus group discussions, where you get a group of individuals or participants, and you're able to ask them usually some pretty open-ended questions, and you want to record those discussions and then draw some analysis on those, like what are the themes that come out of that. You can also get some good quotes out of that as well. You can do in-depth interviews, so that's more of like a one-on-one approach, similar to a focus group discussion. You can just do what's called participant observation. This is an anthropological methodology where you're just observing the delivery of a product or service, the distribution, but really observing it very closely and making close note of what's going on. And then there's a cool methodology called most significant change, which is a great way to gather stories and a really participatory way of gathering stories. Happy to field some questions about that, or maybe some folks in the group have experimented with MSC. Just to point out some common digital data collection tools that you could think about. I mean, again, depends heavily on what what your business is doing and what your organization is doing. Whether you need a mobile data collection tool, tools like Kobo Toolbox and Open Data Kit are free and open source and can do a ton with those. If you want to be collecting data on the web, you can do that with tools like Airtable or Form Assembly or other tools. One thing you really want to be thinking about with whatever your data collection tool is the next step in the data cycle. How are we going to manage all of this data, and then how are we going to analyze it? So there's a really common pitfall that I'll talk about in a minute, but I wouldn't just focus on the collection side of it. Really do think about downstream, how are we going to manage and analyze that data? Speaking of which, the systems is the next pillar. So there's really three questions to answer around a system. The first is this going to meet our needs today? The second is it going to meet our needs in 5 years? And the next is, what is this going to cost, right? So when we're thinking about our data systems, usually you want to break down the cost into the setup cost, the license cost or the ongoing license cost, and then the maintenance cost. And maintenance cost may have a dollar value to it, or it may come in the form of your staff ripping their hair out because your system is so painful to use, right? So you want to think about that you can think about that in a couple of different ways, but that's how you want to look at the system cost. You don't want to just focus on the license cost or just focus on the setup cost. That's a common pitfall we see organizations take when they're thinking about technology for impact measurement. So can it meet our needs today? Can it meet our needs in 5 years? What's it going to cost? We actually have a great blog post on the Vera blog. You can even just Google 10 criteria to evaluate in choosing a technology, and you can find our blog. We'll share this in our follow-up as well, so you can check out this framework. And this is really just a good holistic and objective way to be able to get to a good decision for choosing a technology that's going to set you up for the future really well. This is, I mentioned, kind of the most common data pitfall is that people just skip the data management piece, right? That you kind of say, well, we don't have time or budget or the resources for a data management system. We can just collect data on a Google form and then analyze it with Power BI or analyze it with Excel or whatever. And you can do that, right? It will work for a period of time. But if you want to set up your organization to be able to evolve, you want your systems and your impact measurement to evolve as your organization evolves and as the market evolves. Having a really good data management system is something that does bear a lot of does bring a lot of dividends. It does pay off in a big way. Certainly, for us, having our Salesforce system that we've managed our company on for the last 5 years is invaluable, right? Because I can answer any question you would come to me with. Like, I can answer that question within 90 seconds from our data system, because we've been tracking all of our data consistently for the last 15 years. And I think that goes for a lot of our clients that use Salesforce or other tools as well. So those are the first three, and the last one is really around capacity, and this is often neglected as well. So you really want to think about capacity in terms of capable person hours. So your staff need the skills. Yes. Sorry. Was there a question, or somebody just on? We've reached the recording limit. Fun. Oh, somebody has on Otter. Sorry about that. I'll finish this thought, and if people want to pop in with a question, we're right at the Q&A part in a minute anyway. So capacity is really about the skills for doing all of the data cycle, and then also the time for being able to do these activities. So it's the combination of those two. Just having the skills is not sufficient. Just having the time is not sufficient. You need to have within your organization both the skills and the time, and so that's going to require some ongoing investment. So those are the 4 pillars of good impact data: your strategy, your methods, your systems, and your capacity. And if you want to generate more rigorous evidence, you're going to need to invest more in your capacity as an organization. So I'll pause here. I have one more Menti for kind of self-evaluating. I'll open that slide up, and if you guys want to answer the question around how your organization is doing across each of the pillars, that's our last Menti question. And then we'll also have a chance for any other questions that you guys that you guys want to field at the moment, and then I'll hand back to Tom in just a moment after that. So let's see how we're doing here. How would you rate your organization on the 4 pillars of impact measurement, of good impact data? So your impact measurement strategy, your data collection methods, your impact data systems, and then your capacity, your people capacity for impact measurement. Cool. We're starting to get some data coming in. This is great because it helps me know where we can maybe be most useful. So it looks like capacity struggling a bit. Capacity and systems are lagging a bit behind. I think on all of these, we've got a lot of room for improvement, but also a bit of a distribution. So a few folks that are saying, hey, actually, we got pretty strong methodology. That's good to see. Great to see. I do think whenever we run this session, we see that, there's a lot to learn from each other, right? And it's really helpful to kind of see examples of organizations that are, maybe they're a 7 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10 already on the strategy and the methods side. So I strongly encourage you guys to, create space for these conversations, to connect with other, MB 100 folks and MB members, to really tap into their experiences. We can also help facilitate some of that connection as well. I'm sure Tom can help facilitate that connection to help you connect with organizations that maybe are doing a bit better when it comes to systems or capacity. In Vera's case, as you saw from my story at the beginning, right? Like we really started Vera because we saw, hey, actually there's the sector as a whole is really struggling when it comes to impact data systems and capacity, right? So that's really where we've focused a lot of our energy over the years. And increasingly what we're finding is actually there's also a lot of organizations that need some help with their strategy. And so that's something that we have started working on as well, is providing advisory services to organizations that want to improve their strategy or want to improve their data collection method. So if that's an area where we could be helpful to you guys, we'd be happy to chat about that. I'll share a little bit more about kind of an offer for the MB community in a second on that front. Let's see what questions folks have though. See if we have anything anything stood out to you, Tom, from the chat here. Mostly people like our stir fry.
Yeah, people are hungry, that's for sure.
I don't doubt it. Can always count on people.
Hello.
Yeah, please jump on.
Yeah, I have a question. Right now with today's world around data, especially, you have different roles. Like you have a data engineer, you have a data scientist, you have a data analyst. There's the infrastructure team.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really challenging to identify for us, as example, at Little Thinking Mind. We've been working with external consultants to define the theory of change, and we are working on defining our data pipeline to establish a proper data pipeline.
Great.
But the challenge that we have on, structuring the team that we have in order to have that data pipeline ready, up and running. This is still in progress. We're trying to figure out. I think what you have presented clearly explains. I'm happy because I validated the steps that we did,
yeah.
which exactly matches the stuff that you have mentioned in the slides previously.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, it's really for a medium-sized company. It's going to be very costly to have that set up, like the team in place to have that data pipeline collection and to track and improve the impact that you do. In addition to the questions that we need to answer, like how much of historical data that we should keep, because you need to balance the cost of the system that you have.
Sure.
So could you share some of how the company can start small on this lens and then grow big? What kind of expertise that they should start with? As example, today we only have Mixpanel to track the engagement, but there are other platforms I need to beyond engagement metrics.
Yep. Oh, definitely. Well, thanks for the question, Hella. And where are you calling in from, Hella?
I'm based in Jordan from Little Thinking Mind.
Awesome. So this is a great question, and I especially love the question around how can we kind of start small in order to get to a better place over time. And I think that we always encourage, especially when we're talking about systems and capacity, which I think are really the two areas there for Hala to be taking a crack at, is like, we're asking a lot of the right questions, we're collecting quite a bit of the data, we're working on our data pipelines here. what sounds like needs to be defined is, you know, what are the tools or the technologies that we're going to use for managing all this data, and then what kinds of analysis need to be done, and that's going to drive. I would say that's probably going to drive the kinds of skills that you're going to need for the tech team, right? There's a technology set of skills there. Just I wouldn't want necessarily any old data engineer. I would want an engineer that specifically has experience working with the technologies that we're using. This day and age, there's a lot of technologies for data management that we can use that don't require programming or engineering. So you don't necessarily need to invest in a whole team of developers if you want to use simple technologies with tools for building out kind of relational databases that you can kind of load data into. Airtable is a decent example of a kind of easy, like quick and easy tool where understanding the organization and the data really well is important to design the right data model, but the technology is actually not really that hard, right? And I think what we find is another kind of common pitfall here is if you have your developers and then you've got like the people who have needs, and then you got people who are trying to translate those needs to the developers, like you can end up, as you say, it can end up getting quite costly, right, to set up those systems. So where you can use declarative systems, whether that's, Salesforce, Airtable, various Microsoft tools, that's going to probably, and the same I think goes for analysis, right? There's so much you can do with Power BI and Tableau, for example, that doesn't have to require super advanced skill sets. I'd probably start there, and I probably wouldn't start with trying to solve everything. I would probably start with solving a few pieces of the data pipeline, and going from there. But you may find that 10 criteria piece to be useful in thinking through the right technology. Cool.
Yeah, makes sense. But it's very challenging. I'm telling you,
Yeah.
like from the market itself, it's very challenging to find the skill set that would help you to establish these basic things, like starting from the data transformation to the data pipeline due to the complexity. Today I'm a head of product. In the past few years, like 10 years back, I used to be an engineer. I used to run the show on my own, honestly.
Yeah.
But today there are this is how it's being structured, which adds additional cost. I don't know. It's a bit challenging.
Yeah, I hear you, but I also think that I think technology has evolved a lot in the last decade in particular, and it doesn't the complexity of getting a system up and running is not the same as it was 10, 15 years ago, right? When we're looking at staff at Vera, right, we're 140 staff around the globe, and we're fully dedicated to helping organizations put better impact measurement systems and program management systems, operational systems into place. We do have developers, but it's a small minority of our company that is really an engineer or a programmer. Because what's really important for us is that we have staff and consultants who can speak the language that our clients speak and be able to translate, hey, this is the need into this is the solution. And that's what I was trying to get at, is like there's a lot of declarative technologies where it's closer to point and click to kind of build the tool. You need to know that tool, right? You need to know about databases, but you don't necessarily need to have a bachelor's in computer science, if you see what I mean. And I appreciate that's like kind of a hard message to land with somebody who is an engineer. But that's sort of my viewpoint. All right, we got Kenya Climate Ventures has their hand up, so I want to pass the mic to them. And we got Katrine after that. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much. My name is Ramji Krishna, supporting Kenya Climate Ventures in the ESG and impact. My question is on climate impact data.
Okay.
And we are dealing with early stage companies, MSMEs, and to get a standardized impact data needs a lot of studies to be done, which is a little bit expensive.
Yes.
For some of these MSMEs to handle. So my question is, if I am to report on a relatively accurate data on CO2 emissions reductions generated, is it okay for me to identify company-specific activities and identify specific emission factors that relate to the activities to generate a calculator to report on their specific CO2 emissions reduction? Is it in order?
Yeah, essentially, to generalize this, this is a really specific question, but I'll generalize it. I'll generalize it a little bit for everybody, which is to say, how I would frame the question as how rigorous do we need to be when it comes to understanding depth, right? So in the KCV example here, right, it's trying to look at CO2 emissions and can we just create kind of a simple calculator that as we get reach data, we can kind of roughly calculate here's the impact of that. And what you may be missing there is precision around the depth data, right? And rigor, right? So rigor is going to give you more confidence that what you're kind of claiming, that what you're stating is the impact that's being achieved is really happening in reality. And so I would I think it's an important this is an important question to be raising. I would throw it back to say, well, what are the standards of evidence that are expected by the people that ultimately that ultimately need to be reported to, right? If they've got a certain standard, I would anchor on that standard, and if that standard is something that can't be met with the current current investment in systems, tools, methodology, then I think there needs to be a healthy conversation about, hey, look, like there's a mismatch here. The expectations are here, and we really need to invest more heavily in designing kind of rigorous data. In the meantime, I think like you can definitely take the approach you're describing. I would just want to caveat it a bit, right? I would want to kind of state your assumptions really clearly. We worked with an organization 13 years ago, right? That was they were doing health programs in Mozambique, and they were making some really bold claims about the lives saved and the DALYs averted, so disability adjusted life years averted. And that was really helpful for them to be able to secure more funding for their public health programs. What's important when you're doing that is just to be really clear about the assumptions that you're making and the sort of leap that you're making, right? So I don't think it's wrong to do it. Some people might say that it's wrong to do it. I think you just need to be really transparent with what assumptions are being made or what methodology is being used to do the calculation. We'll go to Katrine and then we'll come back for a little bit more, a couple final slides. Yeah, Katrine.
I want to first of all say thank you so much for this session. It's very educating and it's just making a lot of things clear for us. I think we've had the advantage of having some donor funding for particular projects, and that has enabled us to do small data and sort of with clear indicators, and it has helped in many ways. And my question is about value for money. Mm-hmm. Because we are often asked, how is your model, how does it give value for money in applications? So my question is around how to generate data that has what you are describing here, mm-hmm. but also has a financial side to it. To actually show, to have more clearly sort of the cost effectiveness, but I think value for money is not only finance. I hope that's clear.
No, definitely, but it's the financial denominator, right? That we can kind of make a calculation against. And again, the same rule applies to the KCV question, which is we want to be really clear and transparent around the methodology that's being used there. I think we don't just want to use reach data when we're communicating about value for money. We can, right? We can say, okay, we reached this many people, and the program costs this, or the intervention costs this. Therefore, we can reach, per person, it costs this much to reach an additional person. That's helpful operationally. That's helpful to know. And you might find, hey, actually, it costs a little bit more to run this in a rural setting than in an urban setting. That's helpful operational data. It doesn't, just because it costs less somewhere doesn't mean that doesn't mean that that's like that we should only run the program or run that intervention there. But it can be a helpful lens. What you want to do is actually, where you can, if you can get a blend of reach and depth to kind of combine those into an impact metric that can tell you kind of a unit of impact, a unit where we're actually able to say something that combines your reach and depth. So For 1 acre fund, that might be the number of farmers that have achieved a certain amount of savings, right, from their programs. Or for Susu, it's the number of individuals that they've helped to establish a credit score, or the number of individuals they've taken from subprime to prime credit scores, right? I know those are very like niche examples, but or for World Bicycle Relief, right? It could be the number of girls, the number of school days that they've saved, right? Like that get attended by a girl that otherwise don't, or maybe you could break it down to graduation rates or something like that. So it does take a measure of depth to be able to make that kind of claim, to be able to get to a good like value of money or social return on investment. And what becomes most powerful is when we can bring depth and reach together to be able to make claims like these are the number of individuals who've seen this much benefit. And from there, you can actually get a good value for money. If you know what it costs to deliver for that group of individuals that you served, you can then say, cool, it costs $50 to achieve one result, whatever the indicator is. But this is certainly something we could follow up on and chat more about. It's a really, really good question. Cool. Also had some good questions in the chat here from Shumarai around, young organization. We're looking to raise some impact funding. Do we need to measure depth? Should we be measuring our depth ourselves, or should we immediately use an external organization like an external, like an educational institution to measure that depth data? So this is a super interesting question. So one of the best books around impact measurement that I've read is now I'm forgetting the name of it. Shoot, it's a sort of a handbook for evaluation. We'll follow up with this as a resource. Don Nutbeam, and I'm blanking on the name of the book, but he produces something called a rocket model, right, where he's sort of showing like what kinds of activities are most important over the course of the lifetime of an organization. So what he argues is that actually like impact evaluation or outcome evaluation is really important in the early days of an intervention, because it tells us, is this actually making a difference per unit? Is this making a difference or not, right? Because if it isn't, then like you shouldn't be doing that ideally, right? Like you want to go back to the drawing board, redesign it, and then come back with something that actually makes a difference. So his argument is actually that reach data or output tracking becomes more important. That monitoring becomes more important over time once we already know that something works. So I think implicit in this question from Shumarai is, it is really important in the early days, or implicit in the answer anyway. It's really important in the early days to be getting a sense of depth. I don't think it's critical to be doing a really rigorous evaluation in the early days. What I think most academics would say, and again, for what it's worth, I have a PhD in epidemiology, and I've run 3 randomized control trials. What I would say, and I think what a lot of academics would say, is you want to have some preliminary outcome data before you invest in a really rigorous evaluation of a program or an intervention. So you can just be collecting some data yourself to get a sense of, hey, our baseline looked like this. Baseline, where were people coming from before? Where did we get them up to with respect to the same measure, right? Did we retain that benefit over time, or did it dip off over time, right? You can do that without doing a big rigorous study, and it does give you some comparison to be able to say, cool, we are seeing that directionally it's looking pretty good. From that data, you can then start to see, okay, now it's time to invest in a more rigorous evaluation, because we think we could really take this to scale. And it's easier for you and it's easier for others to invest in not just the growth of the business, and to bet on the impact that the business is going to have, but to also invest in that evaluation, if that makes sense, to invest the resources needed to produce that rigorous evidence. Plus, that preliminary data that you have is going to be compelling when you go out to, say, a research partner or an educational institution, being able to go to them to say, like, here's what we're doing, here's what we know so far, right? Like, here's what we've seen so far in terms of our operational data. And if you go back to even my journey, right, the early days with the NGO I was working for, that's what we were doing. We were doing questionnaires, right? Pre and post questionnaires with all of our programs, and getting a sense of, are we moving the needle based on some of the metrics that we wanted to track? And what did we do from there? We then got funding from Gates Foundation and others to run randomized controlled trials to get much more rigorous evidence of the program effectiveness, and then use that to go get government funding and build new partnerships and so on and so forth. So that's a super question. Okay. So this is the kind of last bit here is just this framework I think can be really helpful, and I think it comes back to some of the questions like Hala's question was like, you know, where do we want to invest, you know, where do we want to invest, and what's the investment that's needed. So what we saw from the group's data was like, you know, feedback was an area that was lagging a little bit. Depth, there's some room to improve, and even on stories, right? So this is maybe a framework you can use if we kind of chart out the 4 types of impact data and then the pillars of good impact data. You might color code this table to see, hey, where are we weak? Where are we strong in which of these cells? And then every single cell here is relevant, right? If we're trying to move the needle on our organization's impact measurement, we can pick any cell in this table, and it will enable us to tell a better story, or be able to answer questions from investors, or being able to motivate our staff better with the impact data that we've got and that we're hearing, or improve our offerings through the feedback that we're getting. So that's just a little framework, and you can also apply it through another lens, like how can we get an intern? This may be another answer to Hala's question of how can you start small? Can you get an intern to come and help with, you know, one piece of this? And this is just a quick little brainstorm on different ways that an intern could help in each of the cells, right? They could draft a logic model, or they could try out most significant change with a group of your group of your customers, right? They could conduct a focus group discussion. They could help you start tracking your net promoter score. These are things that could be done in a low cost way, in a low tech way, and you can start to learn from that, and then say, okay, now actually it's worth investing in a tool that we want to, you know, institutionalize this practice a little bit more. So that's the last piece there. You know, what's important just as a theme here, I'm not going to read through all this, but just the overall theme, and I think this came through the questions you guys were asking as well, is we really want to be right sizing the approach to impact measurement, right? So don't think about like, I hope you're not intimidated by everything that needs to be done, right? Everything kind of does come down to this 4x4 table from my point of view, and thinking about, cool, how can we knock one domino over, and the next domino over, and the next domino over, to then, you know, stack up to a better picture of evidence for our organization. So what's a key unanswered question that we can answer, right? Like what are the kinds of impact data we need to answer that question? Who cares about the answer? What would we change as a result of having the answer to that question? What level of rigor is needed, right? And then what happens if we don't like the results, right? So those are all questions that are important to answer before you're kind of making a big investment into, say, an evaluation, right? Or an investment into trying to strengthen your depth data in a big new way. You know, small investment means the stakes are smaller, right? But ultimately the upshot of it is going to be smaller too, right? Big investment, there's a little bit more risk around it, but the upshot of it might be a little bit higher too in terms of what can come from that. If you think about the Isuzu study that they did, for example, or some of the rigorous studies that One Acre Fund or others have done. Okay, Tom. I know we've got 10 minutes left, so I'll pause, and you can I'll let you kind of jump into anything you want to sort of reframe or share from the MB side of things before we jump into like Vera, how Vera might be able to help.
No, I don't think so. I mean, firstly, thank you, Zach. That was very, very good. And obviously we knew it would be, but I think that's exactly the kind of practical session that we are hoping to deliver. I can see from the comments, the feedback has already been very solid. And as you say, we'll be following up with resources post the session. But I think over to you to just close up, and then I'll finish off after you're done.
Super awesome. So if we can be helpful, the reason we exist is we're helping the sector as a whole to amplify its impact, right? So if Vera can be helpful, or if you think you want to have a chat about how we might be able to help in your impact measurement or your technology or both, we do have some offerings that may be helpful for you. So just to paint the picture of what those are, and we've agreed with Meaningful Business that around like a discount of our services for others for anybody in the ecosystem. So we provide technology advisory services, so we can help you to digitize processes, streamline some processes, centralize data. So if you're an organization that's doing really well in the strategy space and the methodology space, but maybe struggling in the systems, it might be that there's a tech gap, and we can help to potentially close that tech gap, give you some recommendations around the best tools. So we have a kind of a quick start tech services offering there over the course of 4 weeks to help you kind of get a good tech strategy in place to take that forward. Alternatively, we also have impact measurement advisory. So if you need help building out a logic model, defining indicators. Some of the questions that were popped in here, right, really require a good deep dive. Again, we take a 4-week approach to this to help you kind of design that theory change or logic model, define the indicators, the collection plans, and so forth. And yeah, or you can kind of combine these together, because oftentimes they really do go together when you're going to map out data flows and how we're going to get from point A to point Z. So this is kind of those offerings and how we shape them up. So you can do technology services with us, impact measurement services with us, or both of them. We've discounted our services substantially for the MB community. If you're interested in tapping into that, this is for projects getting started before the end of March. If this is a good time for you guys to be thinking about this. If not, that's cool. Come have a chat with us, and we can also maybe answer a few questions and make some connections or point you to a couple tools. Again, the reason we exist is to be useful and helpful and kind of share our learnings from the last 15 years with the sector. And the last thing that we also offer is quick start solutions on Salesforce. So if you're interested in Salesforce, either for portfolio management, impact measurement, tracking your program or your distribution of programming, or for fundraising, probably a little bit less relevant for you all. But Salesforce can help on all of these things. It really is an amazing technology platform that when you look at those 10 criteria, it really does quite well. And if you look at, our 430 plus organizations we worked with over the years, they're using the systems for years and years and seeing a lot of compounding value of those. So we have these quick start offerings that run for 6 weeks, so we can kind of get you off of spreadsheets and onto an initial Salesforce system, and then we'll give you some resources to help build your capacity around that as well. So those are some of the ways that Vera can help, but equally happy for you guys to reach out if I can be helpful or if we can be helpful outside of these offerings. My email is so this is the quick start picture. I'm Zak at verasolutions.org. I'll pop that in the chat if you want to drop me a note, or you can grab me on LinkedIn, and we can have a follow-up conversation, see where you're at, see how we might be able to help you out. And otherwise, just a big thanks for everybody's time today, joining in and all the engagement. It's awesome to hear the work that you all are doing, and congratulations on the great work that you're all doing, and we're right there with you in the journey. So keep up the great work.
Perfect. Thank you, Zak. And thank you to the whole Vera team. It's been a pleasure working with you to plan this. I know much preparation was put in, and it's clearly translated. So thank you again, and thank you to everyone for taking out a bit longer than normal for this. We knew it was going to be a useful session, so much appreciated. So we'll be following up with the recording, with the presentation, and a few other resources, and just the offer that Zak and team have kindly made to MB members. But it's great to see everyone, and we'll be in touch very soon. So enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.